Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. You sound good.
Okay. Hi, I'm Mike Macedo. I'm with International Paper and representing the Forestry Association of South Carolina that is co-hosting this webinar with the Nature Conservancy. So hopefully everybody's joined in. We're going to give maybe another 30 seconds for everyone else to join in, and then we'll start. Okay, we're going to get started then. Again, my name's Mike Macedo. I'm with the Internet. I've worked for International Paper for 39 years in a lot of different locations. And I'm representing the Forestry Association of South Carolina today. I'm the co-chair of the Forestry Association. And as I said, we're excited to co-host this with the Nature Conservancy. Just a couple of words about the Forestry Association. We represent landowners, forest industry such as sawmills and paper mills, landowners, sportsmen, loggers. We have about 2,500 members in the state of South Carolina, and we're proud to support an industry that generates an impact of about $21 billion a year of economic impact in the state of South Carolina. And so we're really interested in hearing today also about what some of the folks that are going to be talking to you about their dealings with the carbon markets are, and hopefully we'll all learn something from this. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to our facilitator, David Bishop. David?
Thank you, Mike, and thank you to the South Carolina Forestry Association for helping us co-host this today. I am David Bishop. I am the Coastal and Midlands Conservation Director with the Nature Conservancy. I'm based in Aiken, South Carolina. I would like to thank Bridgestone for sponsoring this Investing in Sustainability webinar series we've been hosting. And today we've actually tapped them to be a guest on this webinar also, so we appreciate that support. For those of you who are not familiar with the Nature Conservancy, we are a science-based, nonpartisan 501c3. We work across the globe and across South Carolina. We work with landowners, we are landowners, and we work with a wide array of conservation partners to protect the lands and waters on which all life depends. We look for practical solutions, particularly as it relates to nature-based solutions to some of our biggest challenges. So today we're going to talk about carbon, specifically forest carbon and forest carbon offsets, and how companies are starting to think about using carbon offsets to meet their sustainability goals. And to do that, we've invited three great guests. We've invited Josh Parrish with the Nature Conservancy, who is our carbon expert on the call, Jim DeMouy with Bridgestone Americas, and Josh Ragland with Norfolk Southern, two companies that have a strong South Carolina footprint and presence. So we want to look at how these things are happening in the region and locally and beyond. But what we really want is our audience to participate if you have an interest, and there's a few ways you can do that. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A button. If you don't, you can hover your mouse down there if it's hidden behind the three dots. That is a way for you to submit questions to anybody. So that will be shared with Lowndes McDonald, who's monitoring those questions, and we'll later read some of those as we go. You can submit those at any time, so feel free to have at it. Also, we got a chat feature, and this is going to go if you have issues with technical issues or questions, you can submit that, and we have that also being monitored. I don't believe this is going to be a public chat, but this is an opportunity if you have some technical challenges. And we're also going to have a few polls just to get a little feel for who the audience is. We looked at registration. It seemed like there's a wide array of people from industry to foresters to students to academics. We're happy to have you all. We're here to all get curious and learn about this. So with that, maybe we'll kick off an initial poll just to get a little feedback from the audience to get us going. So you should see in front of you a question, and you can click on your answer and submit that. Why are you interested in carbon reduction strategies? And you can click multiple answers. I think maybe, I guess we're looking at your primary one. All right. And so there's our results. And we got a wide array. I think like there's a lot of what I expect, a lot of diverse answers. Because we are focused largely on businesses, I think that's to accompany, I think to achieve company leadership goals comes out the top. That makes sense. But we also have a lot of other folks that maybe aren't thinking that way right now. Thank you for participating. We'll have a few of those throughout the time. Now, if that thing is still standing up in front of you, you can hit the little X in the upper right-hand corner and make that go away. Let me tell you a little bit about the format of what we're going to do. So Josh Parrish is going to lead us off in a minute and tell us about how this works. What is a carbon offset? How does the whole thing function? And he doesn't have a whole lot of time to do that. So we're going to take a very high level view of this. And some of you on the call, some of the foresters might be a little more advanced on this, so we'll be able to get into this. But we're going to get started on with a little overview of carbon. And then we will hear from Jim DeMouy at Bridgestone. It'll talk about some interesting work that they've done with this. And also then we'll go to Josh Ragland with Norfolk Southern, who will talk about what their approach has been. And then we're going to really get into the Q&A, which is an opportunity to really ask questions from the audience. So with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Josh Parrish. Josh is the director of the Working Woodlands program for the Nature Conservancy. He works with all the carbon programs throughout North America. And Josh, I'm going to hand it over to you to make us all a little smarter about carbon.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you all for joining today. And yeah, so I'm Josh Parrish. I direct the Working Woodlands program and two other carbon programs at the Nature Conservancy. And in about 7 minutes, I'm going to attempt to, as David said, kind of paint the picture of what's the problem, how, what is a carbon credit and offset, and how forests can be part of that solution within kind of the current markets that are out there. So trying to go to the next slide. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. Oh, apologies. Okay, now we're to the first slide here. So just a little level setting and frame setting. You know, folks on the call are probably well aware of the Paris Agreement in 2016, of the current trend of carbon dioxide buildup in the atmosphere, which as of this morning I heard on NPR hit, I think, 418 parts per million. And over the last million years, I believe until now, we never exceeded 300 parts per million. So, you know, the world has come together to create goals and solutions to reduce the carbon dioxide intensity in the atmosphere. And the Nature Conservancy, obviously, one of the tools in our toolkit at the Nature Conservancy is using carbon credits and carbon offsets to help mitigate and reduce the carbon dioxide equivalent in the atmosphere. And so today I just want to talk to you a little bit about you know, our approaches, which, as you know, as everyone probably on the call knows, I mean, reducing carbon dioxide through forests also has what we call a multitude of other co-benefits, like the ecosystems with water, wildlife, and also for people, for better livelihoods and better sustainable economies. So in Oh boy, this is really slow animation. Apologies, folks. In the United States, the Nature Conservancy and others in 2018 put forth a study to look at natural systems and those systems' ability essentially to sequester or take carbon dioxide out of the air and put it into plant material. And so what we looked at was 20 natural system pathways. And I want to highlight here, forests come out as is the top opportunity area in the United States and also globally. And really the top three things to do for forests are improving management, planting trees, so reforestation, and then avoiding forest loss. And so those three things are the top three opportunity areas in the United States. So the Nature Conservancy works with, and thank you for the companies that are on this call and presenting today and others that are supportive and work with the Nature Conservancy. I just want to say that first. But we work with companies all over the globe that are committed to sustainability and to reducing their footprint in terms of their climate impact. And so just a real high level, how we work with companies and what we look for companies. We look for companies to make, ambitious plans and goals around climate reductions. So what that means first is we call it the mitigation hierarchy. We want to see corporations first and foremost reduce their emissions through efficiencies, through renewables, through all the whole suite of tools that they have to try to innovate and be more efficient. And then and this is where the carbon credits and carbon offsets fit into the picture for the Nature Conservancy and for who we work with. There's a portion of emissions that companies at this current time just cannot mitigate and cannot basically eliminate. And we call those the unavoidable emissions. That's really where we see carbon offsets and carbon credits working and helping essentially move the world to limiting through 2050 warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade. So just want to give you a little snapshot of the markets. So there's two markets in the world around for carbon. There's the voluntary carbon market and there's compliance carbon markets. I wanted to give you just a snapshot here first of the voluntary carbon market. What that means is corporations are under no obligation to purchase the carbon credits, to participate really at all in these programs, but they're doing it for other reasons. As David just put out there and everyone saw, there's a multitude of reasons that corporations are participating and want to kind of learn more and ratchet up kind of their commitments to these programs. What you'll see through 2020 is there's been a lot of growth, in carbon markets, and then also the green wedge is natural climate solutions. So that's things like forestry, agriculture. You can see it's growing as well, which is a great thing. So now I want to, through 2030, this is the projected growth currently to start to sync up with the commitments through Paris through 2050, what we need to do through 2030. So it just shows that it's kind of like the hockey stick of growth here. We need exponential growth in all of these programs, both natural climate solutions and the other things like renewables and other technologies that also have, mitigation impacts. And let's see here. And so, with that, with the markets that are there and across the globe right now, the voluntary carbon market space is the large driver of growth right now and opportunity area for forest owners, in my opinion. With that, this is what I want to end on, kind of how do we unlock that full potential? And, at the Nature Conservancy and working with others, you're going to hear a little bit about a project here later, things, like helping landowners have access to markets, market access for also on corporations on the buyer side, and then continuing to innovate, strengthen, and build out programs, science, technology as the markets grow. These are all really critical things. And with that, I'll leave it at that, and then hope to have some conversation around questions at the end as well.
Thank you, Josh. Maybe as we transition and start to pull up Jim's information, I'm curious. You said the market's obviously going up, market demand for this. Are you seeing any kind of sectors or industries that are really demanding this, or just kind of across the board, all different sizes, different types of businesses?
It's commensurate with sectors and where those sectors are at in this space. So there's some early leaders in sectors that have been in this space for a decade plus, but we're seeing a lot of other folks too start to come in that we have not seen in the past. So I think it's broad interest, broad participation, but obviously where they're at in that journey depends on the sector and is company specific as well.
Well, that's great, and I appreciate that. I'm sure we're going to come back to you with lots of questions. It's a very complicated thing, or a steep learning curve at least. So appreciate that for sort of teeing this up. Next up, I'd like to introduce Jim DeMouy. Jim is the Vice President of Health, Safety, and Sustainability for Bridgestone Americas, and they have done a very interesting project in Tennessee, and Jim can speak to us about that and other stuff they have going on. Hand it over to you, Jim. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Hopefully everyone can hear me and see me okay. David, I can see you. Give me a thumbs up. Is my sound okay?
Yeah, you sound great, Jim.
All right. Well, welcome, everybody. I am Jim DeMouy. I work for Bridgestone Americas out of Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about something we're quite proud of in our donation of our forest we had at Chestnut Mountain, which is now called the Bridgestone Reserve at Chestnut Mountain. So let's just go ahead on to the next slide. I'm going to use the old school approach and say next slide, if that's all right. So I think to put a little bit of context into this as we move through it, maybe some of the questions that come up, I got put a little bit of background on the corporate culture we have. And for Bridgestone, it all starts with our founder, Shujuri Shibashi, years ago, who came out with the phrase that, you can't just contribute by money only, you have to contribute in society in general, or to rephrase that, a business that contributes to society and country will be forever profitable. And the way we kind of say that is, if you're just chasing money alone, you'll be short-lived. So this really goes to our DNA from our founder many years ago, and we'll play into this project. Next slide, please. And where does this project fit in the context of our overall missions and targets? It was referenced on corporations and their specific goals. So we have a very formal set that you can go to our website and see, what they are, but we really focus on three: in harmony with nature, value in natural resources, and reducing CO2 emissions are the three cores. And you can see we have different milestones: 2020, 2030, 2015, et cetera, moving towards, other things. And this particular project falls primarily in harmony with nature one, where we want to contribute to biodiversity, ecosystems, and others, but it has a secondary on the CO2 emission side as well. So this fits core into our mission statements as we move forward as a corporation. Next slide, please. And a little bit of context about Bridgestone in South Carolina. For those of you that aren't familiar, South Carolina is one of our key locations in the United States for manufacturing. We have two very large facilities right outside of Aiken. The one that we just did a recent sustainability project is in the top. You can see this is a 1,500 employee facility. We just recently commissioned a on-site solar array to reduce our, scope 2 emissions from that facility. And as was referenced, all corporations are probably approaching this from every angle possible to reduce their emissions. There's no one magic pill for this. It's going to be a consortium of ideas and contribution efforts to get us there. And then we also have our other Aiken plant here, which is 450 employees. So we're well positioned, along with our 47 Firestone stores that hopefully everyone on the call, if you're in South Carolina or anywhere in the US, gets your car serviced at. So we have a pretty good footprint in South Carolina. Let's move to the next slide, please. So let me introduce you to the property. This is an interesting story for those that kind of track this kind of thing. Back in the day, many years ago, corporations, and this is when it was Firestone, corporations would buy land and they'd do things like golf courses for their employees. And this was originally designed to be an executive retreat, the land that we owned in just outside of Nashville. And it was going to be a golf course. I think maybe even Jack Nicklaus was there at one point or something. There's always all kinds of stories. We were going to have ski lifts, to bring people from different peaks to different peaks, etc. And we've owned and managed it for over 50 years before we donated it. So Let me just introduce you to the property itself and give you an idea of what we're talking about here. Hopefully the next slide in the video will play properly. If it doesn't, we'll truncate it. So just a minute and a half of a video introducing you to this wonderful property. So hopefully that gave you an idea of, you can still hear me, of what the property was about. And that poor squirrel looks like he was going to be lunch here by those two rattlesnakes there on that last slide. So extremely diverse piece of property with a lot of forest and some, Indian hieroglyphics and other things that were really interesting. So in the end, we ended up donating this property to the Nature Reserve and Nature Conservancy, and you can see the celebrations here. So let's move on to the next one. We'll talk about the actual specifics more to what we were thinking. So when we had this property, which is very large, we were trying to, the challenge that was given to me was, are we going to continue to maintain this property on our own, or are there experts out there that could maintain it? Or quite frankly, would it be best to put it into the market and sell it? And so when we started talking about that to developers and others, that was actually a viable option. And we really considered that as a corporation. But at the end, going back to our mission and our vision, we decided to go a different way with that and find a partner that we could get with and donate. And so these are some of the things that we had to get through. And if you're in this position out there for a company that has property, this is kind of a funny statement, but trying to give something away is not easy. The immediate request is, well, how is it going to be funded? How are we going to keep it up? How are we going to maintain all these efforts going forward? So we had to get through all of these particular items here, and I just listed a few of them there. So let's move on to the next slide. And in the end, what we ended up doing was donating the 5,700 acres. It's the largest land donation to the Nature Conservancy in Tennessee. And we had been working for some time with them on this idea of carbon credits and improving the forest and restoration and pine restoration and prairie lands and other things. And we felt like, it's probably not our best, we're not the best experts at this to keep it. Other corporations may make different decisions. So we decided to move it on, but we wanted to see that project completed to get to the idea of credits, et cetera. And a big reason with that was for the funding of the property itself and to continue to reinvest into the property. So it was a really unique arrangement that we settled on with the Nature Conservancy, who ended up being the partner, where all the money, et cetera, that's generated from this particularly goes right back into the property for further enhancement of the biodiversity, other things that's right in our mission statement. So we felt this was a really creative solution to preserve and protect lands, enhance the forest, and then for the corporations that want to do so and buy the credits to participate in that. And part of that is for our tower in Nashville, which is our office, there are going to be enough credits set aside for that. That's a very small piece of our footprint. But the total credit size is around 500,000 or 500,000 tons of carbon that are eventually going to be produced here over the next, when this gets proved out. But again, what we saw was really a win-win value proposition for all stakeholders involved in doing it this way. So we felt the concept was proved by doing this activity, partnering and donating and et cetera. And we decided we wanted to continue to share this message. So that's why if you go to the next slide, we contemplated, if you go to the next slide, it's stuck on mine. Anyway, we contemplated what are we going to do next, and that's led us to our presence in South Carolina, and how can we share this message and share some of this discussion, which leads us today to this meeting. Happy to answer any questions about our particular property itself and how we got there.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. I mean, it's a tremendous gift, obviously, to the Nature Conservancy and really to the citizens of Tennessee to have access to this wonderful place so close to Nashville. I'm curious, you know, I mentioned right at the top that Bridgestone is helping fund this webinar series too, and exploring carbon in other states. What's motivating Bridgestone to not only offset your own emissions and to do this, but really to carry the flag forward and to educate others?
Yeah, well, we obviously, I started with the statement from our founder and our mission statement. So that's the primary driver behind it. But we also want to invest and participate in the places where we live, work, and play, right? And I did also highlight in South Carolina how we have such a big presence. So we like to be leaders in this if we can. You know, we want to share this, you know, with everyone, how it worked, how it can work for a lot of different stakeholders in a lot of different ways. We ourselves don't have any more land to donate. We don't have any more forest to put into this type of program in the Americas. But that doesn't mean the concept wasn't proven and others couldn't do it for society as a whole. If you, in whichever way they want to participate, if it's just the forest preservation and enhancement, or if it's the carbon credit that they're generating, that's a choice individuals or companies can make. But we like sharing the message, and we thought it was a very unique and you know, forward-looking way to achieve some of our goals, not just individually, but for society.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. It's a very creative solution, I think, at the end of the day. Up next, I want to introduce Josh Ragland. Josh, the Chief Sustainability Officer for Norfolk Southern. They also happen to be a large landowner in South Carolina, and Josh has come up with some creative projects of their own. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Josh.
Great, thank you. Let me get my screen started here, David. It's great to be here with you all today to tell you a little bit about our carbon projects at 2 different carbon projects that we've been a part of. Tell me when you can see my screen there, David.
Look good, Josh.
Okay. My background is in wildlife biology, but I have to tell you that I've been a railroader for going on 25 years now. So I got to tell you a little bit about the railroad. You know, at Norfolk Southern, we provide logistics solutions for over 3,800 customers. If you can imagine the product, we probably ship it. So we link communities and customers to marketplaces all around the world. We currently have 19,000 employees, and we operate over 19,000 route miles. So it makes it really easy to remember. And that's in the eastern 22 states, which is important because we cover 65% of all manufacturing and 75% of the US population. In South Carolina, we operate over 750 miles of track. Our largest customer is BMW, followed by Bridgestone, thank you, Jim, and Michelin. Our partnership with the South Carolina Port Authority with the inland port at Greer and started in 2012, and this has far exceeded all of our expectations for volume. The daily intermodal and automotive trains that we run back and forth between Charleston and Greer, those movements take around 200,000 trucks off of Interstate 26, which is around 550 a day, which is quite significant.
Hey, Josh,
Forestry.
Excuse me for interrupting, Josh. I think your presentation mode, if you could go to the presentation mode, we're seeing some of your background too. You click on the slide mode. Sorry to interrupt you.
Sorry, looking for your Zoom control.
I think if you go
on right now, David.
I think if you go, I'm seeing your slide and then also the preview slide.
Yeah, I haven't gone forward to the next slide yet.
Presenter view.
Okay, stand by.
If you go to the display settings at the top.
Let's try this again. How about now, David?
No, I'm still seeing the same thing, Josh. I wonder if
Oh.
it'd be easier for Brian maybe to do it.
How about now?
There you go. You got it.
Great, thank you. Sorry
Thank
about that. Even though we tested this earlier, right? But you know, back to what we're doing in South Carolina. You know, so we do ship a lot of forest products as well. Rail is on average 3 to 4 times more efficient than truck, which allows our customers to avoid around 75% emissions by choosing rail. So the choice of their transportation mode is one of their most powerful levers to reduce the size of their carbon footprint. So we are in the business of a better planet by working with our customers. We estimate that on an annual basis, our customers avoid around 15 million metric tons of emissions by choosing rail over truck. And so that's the equivalent of CO2 sequestered, for example, by around 5 million acres of pine forest. Speaking of pine trees, I want to tell you about a special place known as Bridgestone Forest. The image that you see on the picture here, it is from our Bridgestone Forest property. The picture is actually from the 1930s, but our story actually goes back 100 years before this time. So it's been a part of my company's legacy for over 200 years now. Our earliest predecessor company owned this property, and that was the South Carolina Canal and Railroad. They actually owned over 100,000 acres stretching along the rail line from Charleston to Aiken, South Carolina. The timber, it was really important. It was not only used for building the line, but for maintaining the line, cross ties, bridge timbers, and also the fuel source, you know, for moving these steam locomotives. So really biofuel. In 1907, the president of our company at that time was W.W. Finley, and he made a statement that's very important even to today. He was urging landowners to, quote, put into practices of management that will make your forest yield present profit consistent with their preservation. So to put it in another way, to preserve your forest lands, you're going to need to make some money. In 1925, the company put Finley's statement into practice, and Southern Railway established the first demonstration forest in the state of South Carolina. And they were really known as a pioneer in forestry and shipped a lot of forest products. Turning to Bridgestone Forest today, the land currently covers around 15,000 acres in Dorchester County. I like to tell people it's roughly the same size as of the island of Manhattan, but with 9 million fewer people. In fact, we have more endangered species than people on the property, which is quite significant. You could actually spend years at the property and never see all the species of plants and animals. The property currently serves as a conference and recreation facility for customer employee meetings. We also do a lot of research there as well, working with universities for wildlife and forestry. And we do a lot of restoration of ecosystems as well, including wetlands and streams. It is certified by the Forest Stewardship Council. Uniquely, it has around 6,000 acres of an even age longleaf pine, with the oldest trees being in excess of 120 years of age. Over the past 20 years, we've planted around an additional 2,000 acres of longleaf on the property. And significantly, a conservation easement was placed on the majority of the property back in 2008, protecting the land in perpetuity. Today, this ecological gym, it continues to inspire the way that we think about sustainability at Norfolk Southern. We call it the Bridgestone Forest ethic. And we're applying the lessons that we have learned here over the years to today's challenges of reducing carbon emissions. Norfolk Southern put land into a forest carbon project over a decade ago, and our partners were Milliken Forestry Company and Finite Carbon. The 10,000 acres of pine that we enrolled were in the compliance market and with the California Air Resources Board. The project for Norfolk Southern created around 350,000 carbon credits and is currently adding up to another 30,000 on an annual basis as the trees continue to sequester CO2. We have sold a fair number of these credits, and this revenue helps to offset the expenses. You all aware, a number of landowners on the call, it takes money to manage these ecosystems, and timber alone has not been providing enough to support that. So we have really diversified our revenue streams, and carbon is just one of those many revenue streams. I like to call this project our Trees and Trains project. Norfolk Southern, we invested in green trees back in 2011. The goal of this project was to restore 10,000 acres of land from agriculture back to historical hardwoods. On the slide, you see there the area in blue. That represents the lower Mississippi alluvial valley and the historic floodplain of the lower Mississippi River. It's a really extremely important area, particularly as a flyway for migratory birds, and it also drains 40% of North America. This area was once 25 million acres of hardwood forest, which is hard to believe, but now only 20% of this original hardwood now remains. The rest has been cleared for agricultural production, with most of it now flooding on an almost annual basis. Green Trees, our partner, they are the largest reforestation program in the world, with 130,000 acres restored thus far, and a goal of 1 million. For Norfolk Southern, this project for us has generated 240,000 carbon credits thus far, and is adding another 50,000 plus per year as the trees continue to mature and grow. You know, from an economic perspective, this project generated carbon offsets for Norfolk Southern, which, as we all know, have value, and that value is continuing to grow. And from an environmental perspective, it helps restore this hardwood ecosystem, which has numerous benefits, including wildlife habitat, flood control, and water storage. And from a social perspective, it really supports family forest landowners, allowing them to return their property back to hardwood forest, which creates long-term value for them, and including recreational value. So it's a great win-win-win project that we're very proud of. And there is a short video available if you Google search Norfolk Southern Trees and Trains. So in closing, let me just say that, you know, much of our land stewardship at Norfolk Southern actually derives from our experience at Brosnan over the last 2 centuries. And we're going to continue to apply this Brosnan forest ethic as we look at other real estate assets. I'll turn it back to you, David.
Thank you, Josh. That's interesting. So you kind of took a couple different approaches. One, you own land that you use carbon to help offset some of those management costs, because you have. I've been to Brosnan. It's a beautiful place. It's quail woods. It's longleaf pine. It's, you know, you could make more money if it was in intensive forestry, but carbon's helping you maintain that condition, which has a lot of ecosystem benefits. I'm curious, when you were selling those credits, you mentioned you sold them to the compliance market. Is there any thoughts on, you know, that you developed the project, you could sell it in either one. Why did you choose compliance, and would you do the same thing now?
Yeah, that decision was probably made in 07 or 08, David. The carbon markets back then were kind of just developing. The voluntary market was quite not as mature, and the projections at that time were that the price of credits in the compliance market were going to increase much higher than the voluntary credits. And I'll say that's actually almost the opposite now. We've really seen a reversal there, particularly over the course of the last 5 years, as corporations in particular ramped up demand for voluntary carbon offsets. And then you also have the international airlines agreeing to CORSIA just a few years ago. And so there's going to be huge demand in the voluntary marketplace for credits, which is, you know, a good thing for us. So as we look at future projects, we'll definitely go down the voluntary market. And the time frame is much shorter as well, as far as the commitment.
That's interesting. Thank you. And we've appreciated your, you know, y'all came into this carbon stuff very early in the process, and with Milliken's help, and really been leaders for others that have followed as landowners. So that's been very interesting. We're going to transition here in a minute to some audience questions. So I'm going to encourage you, if you have a question, to go ahead and submit it in the Q&A box. Maybe I'll lead off with a question to some folks, and then we'll transition. I'm curious, and I'm gonna start with you, Jim. You know, are your customers, or, you know, your public companies, are your customers or shareholders demanding you do this, or is this coming more within? And you talked about some internal philosophies you have, but I'm kind of curious from the outside pressures, both from shareholders and customers. How are you seeing their response to this? And I'm going to get you to answer, Jim, and I'm going to let you have the same question, Josh.
Thanks, David. So I infer your question is more about carbon in general versus just carbon forest, and if you will. So, I mean, I think it's all of the above, right? And we participate in society. It's in our ethos to be contributory to society, as I already mentioned. But and we would be doing it, and we have been doing it as policies have changed, or government policies have changed either way, for or against, etc. We've stayed the course, if you will. But there's certainly outside influence as well. I mean, our customers, and I think generally in society globally, everyone is. I don't know what the phrase is, getting on the bandwagon, if you will, that we need to get ahead of this global warming, and that relates to CO2 emissions, et cetera. So I think it's all of the above, right? But I do absolutely want to reiterate, it was already in our ethos in our company anyway. It just makes it a little more challenging, a little more visible, and all of that type of information.
Yeah, thank you. How about you, Josh?
Yeah, David, I would say we're having a lot of interest from our investors and our customers around decarbonizing. And the great news for that is we can help them. We can help our customers with their to meet their carbon reduction goals. Over 25% of our customers have publicly report to CDP, so they have publicized their carbon reduction goals. And so rail can be a part of that solution. And then turning to our investor side, they're very interested in what we're doing, not just to sequester CO2, but also reducing our emissions. So we just completed a 5-year goal, and we improved locomotive fuel efficiency by 9.4%, which is quite significant. And we'll be setting a new goal fairly soon. But it's really great that even though we are so fuel efficient, we continue to find ways to, with technology and different things coming out, that we continue to drive fuel efficiency. And our emissions are our customers' emissions at the end of the day. And so when they start setting goals around their scope 3 emissions, we can help them in those regards.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what I'm hearing from both of you is forest carbon, and Josh set this up at the beginning, Josh Parrish, forest carbon is sort of a step over as towards a bigger solution. And Jim was talking about the solar array they've invested in, and Norfolk Southern's talking about gains in efficiency. So it's really a holistic approach to achieving your target. So I'm going to ask Josh Parrish a real quick question, and we'll transition over to some more audience stuff. Josh, these are kind of weird companies. They own big tracts of land that they've been great stewards of for a long time. Not every company does that. How hard is it for a company that doesn't have that but wants to do some forest carbon offsets? How hard is it for them to purchase those? What's that process look like?
Well, first I want to say, thanks to Josh and Jim. And Jim, I had the benefit of going down and being on Chestnut Mountain a month ago. So thank you, beautiful property. But again, so for other companies that are looking to start to participate and purchase forest carbon offsets, I would say, the first thing to do is educate yourself. There's resources out there, there's ecosystem marketplace, come to the Nature Conservancy and our partners. And we're always looking to work with and assist corporations kind of on that, as David said, holistic journey. And the best thing for you to do as a company, obviously, is to plan holistically, and then as you look at your unavoidable emissions, think about strategies. And to the extent it includes forest and natural climate solutions, we want you to be part of our team, and come talk to us, and certainly talk to others.
Yeah, thank you. So I know we got a ton of questions coming in, and I'm sure we won't be able to address them all, but we'll do our best to work through them. I'm going to bring up another poll again. Make sure everybody's still out there with me. You should see one in front of you. If you're facing obstacles in pursuing forest carbon offsets, what are they? Just sort of get an idea of this, where you're coming from. And again, if you have questions, feel free to submit those at the Q&A box. The tallies are coming in. A few more seconds here. Lack of knowledge is the winner. I think this is still new, right? I mean, even though Brosnan were some early adopters, and Bridgestone too, these it's still kind of new for everybody. It's new for landowners, new for companies, new for foresters. So there is that learning curve. And I think you're starting to see more and more of this about the education components. Well, thank you for participating.
So David, can I comment on that? So that's exactly why, you know, I spoke to, which led us to help sponsor some of these events to, you know, if nothing else, get the word out that this is a possible opportunity for landowners, whether they be corporations or individuals or institutions. And, you know, we've seen some pickup on that, right? I mean, in Tennessee, we saw the University of Tennessee start to donate their lands in the same kind of concept as well. So, you know, I think the more the word spreads, the better, and the more knowledge can be communicated. So it is new.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. That's a great point. All right, Lowndes McDonald, my colleague, I'm gonna hand it over to you and maybe throw some questions out to whomever.
Great. Thanks, David. And thanks again to the panelists and to our colleague, Josh Parrish, for being a part of this. I'm going to start with, I think, just kind of a clarification question, a little bit of more description about what the compliance carbon market is, and maybe just kind of the differences between compliance and voluntary. Josh Parrish, I think if you could take this one on, that would be great.
Sure. So compliance markets, I think Josh Ragland mentioned their first project was to California ARB, the Longleaf Pine Project. Those are jurisdictions that create a rule set and a cap typically on emissions for emitters over typically a certain point source at this point in time, like California. And so corporations who operate in those states, utilities, whoever have a cap, they have to, you know, they ratchet down the cap over time. Typically jurisdictions give out what they call allowances, so you can still emit, but then offsets are a small part of that. And so really what compliance means that you're legally compelled to have your emissions at a certain level, and then there's a carbon credit market on the back end of it and offsets, and that's part of that mechanism. It's not the only thing. It's actually a small amount if you look at those markets, the actual carbon offsets, but it's still a large investment in forests and other systems. Voluntary markets are just that. They're voluntary. Now, what we're seeing, you saw that 2030 growth, you know, it's potentially up to 10x where we're at now, which is astronomical growth through 2030. There's certain sectors right now that are looking at the and some have already created rule sets like CORSIA, you know, international aviation, that are looking at the voluntary market as a way to have a kind of a industry-wide or sectoral approach to setting a cap and then ratcheting down over time. It's so the voluntary space is typically that it's companies, you know, that are doing this because of a whole multitude of reasons. But what I'm seeing, a trend I'm seeing in the voluntary space, though, is number one, a lot of growth, innovation on the supply and the demand side, but then also industries and others looking at the voluntary. It's almost a de facto compliance market. So that's where we're kind of going to get to that 10x. But those are the two market types. They're, you know, the compliance has more transparency around pricing and marketplace, like voluntary at this point in time. There's obviously, to get to 10x, we need to have better systems around all of that and transparency on the financial side too, but it's developing. I'll say those things are coming together.
Great. All right, Jim, this next one is for you. And I think, again, this is just a little bit more of an expansion of something you touched on in your presentation. But did the Bridgestone project keep all the credits, or have you sold them back onto the market?
Sure, thanks for the question. So this is a really interesting concept. So we actually do not receive any revenue at all from the property or the credits or any of those things. As part of the donation, the entire property and everything went with it. So, and that's also required by law if you're in this type of donation aspect. We could put, due to the donation constraints, some guardrails, if you will, how we wanted the property to be used. But when you donate something, you actually lose control of it. So the credits are completely in TNC's hands to do what they feel they want to do with them. However, with some of the guardrails, as I said before, we've established, you know, we want that money reinvested back into the property to further develop and enhance the forest and other things that go along. So the short answer to the question is, no, we don't have the credits, we don't have the money, and so we couldn't retain any of them actually.
Great. Okay, Josh Ragland, this one is for you. How do these projects led by Norfolk Southern manage their other projects which require land and environment to be changed or deforested?
That's a great question. So we do have a significant amount of real estate assets, and some of those are for industrial development sites. There's various uses of property, and we need sites, along rail lines. It's very expensive to extend rail lines to locations in the middle of nowhere. It's much better to build next to those rail lines. So, our property, if you looked at all of our property and added up how much carbon we're sequestering on an annual basis, it would be absolutely enormous. So how can you take advantage of that and still have development? So we're going to have properties that are going to need to be developed, and there's going to be environmental consequences there. But we hope that the things that we're doing in the marketplace, like forest carbon projects, like wetland restoration, are going to more than offset the environmental impacts.
Great. Okay, Jim, I'm coming back to you. Could you talk a bit more about the internal strategic discussions that likely took place in order to navigate the difficulties of giving away a sizable piece of real estate?
I mean, I could go on for days talking about that. It was a lot of fun, right? I mean, just to be candid, I mean, you're talking a high dollar asset that could be sold for a very substantial amount of money, right? That's the elephant in the room, and that was the counter we always had to go against. But as I was talking, we developed the concept of what's the total value of the property versus just strictly the monetary value of the property. How can we contribute to society on a greater level, right? And so you had the local, and I saw some other questions about like the local community tax revenues. How would that be affected? What about getting onto the property for the population and ecotourism and other things, or did we just need no offense to anyone, but another clear-cut property or something else, or development that may come in on the beautiful property? So we really weighed that back and forth. And just a little side note at the time we were doing this, the administration in the U.S. changed and the tax laws changed. So the donation write-offs were cut basically in half. So the seesaw, if you will, for the monetary side just to sell seemed to even be greater. But to the credit of the corporation and the concept I was mentioning about total value, we discussed this and we felt it was a better option. Proof of concept on carbon credits, proof of concept on preserving land and self-funding and all that, that would have a greater contribution in total value. So in the end of the day, the leadership, I'm very proud to say the leadership made the decision to donate this and continue it, on a trend of what leads us today, right? Where we can share this message and hopefully others can follow in similar vein.
Great.
But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
All right, we got kind of a general question. I'm going to see if maybe Josh Parrish wants to answer it, and then if Josh Ragland or Jim, you want to jump into for this one. But for those just entering the sustainability planning and implementation world, do you have advice starting to investigate forest carbon and offset projects early, or waiting until we have a full accounting of our operations across our facilities and production?
So I would start earlier than waiting for your full accounting to come back, and then and basically look to build relationships and understanding of projects. And then by the time you get to the point where, here's my unavoidable emissions, you've got relationships set up and you have an understanding of those projects. Because I will say that while supply is growing in the US for these projects, demand's also growing alongside of it, if not outstripping it at this point. So, the more you kind of get out there, the more you know. And then I see a lot of corporations that also would like to have kind of a hand at creating the projects. So there's another opportunity, like lining up conservation, forestry, and carbon. And so there's all kinds of different ways you can be involved. But I would say earlier than later. That'd be my answer, Miles.
Great. Jim or Josh, y'all have any advice there?
Yeah, I would say you needed to start it 10 years ago. It takes a while to grow trees and sequester carbon. So if you're going to do reforestation, the sooner you put trees in the ground, the sooner you're going to sequester carbon. And once those trees get 5 years of age and older, that's when the carbon sequestration really picks up. So the market's here. I mean, you look at some of the recent reports by McKinsey. they're projecting, you know, a potential $50 billion market by 2030 in voluntary carbon, you know, 100-fold increase in demand for carbon credits by 2050. Yeah, you need to get in the game as soon as possible. Would be my advice.
Yeah, I would echo all of that, and you know, but it sounds like you are where you are, right? So I would advise parallel paths, and for whoever asked the question, and while you're doing your accounting, pursue whatever opportunities you have, because Josh's point, you know, you have to get stuff going, and it takes quite a while to reach fruition. It's not an overnight thing, and it requires a lot of science and study. And one point that maybe hasn't been brought up, it's not just that you have a tree, an existing tree that allows you to get some of these credits. There has to be some other aspect to it, some gain in some way to get the credits, not just that you have a tree per se. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Josh, but anyway, there's some improvement that needs to take place. So anyway, I would say start early and do parallel paths.
Well, I think I'm gonna jump in here, Lowndes. I know we're getting close to time, and as figured, we just barely scratched the surface of this topic. It's so fruitful. We could spend days talking about it. There's so many good questions, and there's so many questions about it. And we hope what we did here was maybe introduce you to a very evolving and complex topic. I'm gonna, as we kind of transition here to the end of the hour here, I'm gonna maybe ask for, just so we can learn a little bit more about you. We'll have a quick poll come up in just a second, but I'm also going to introduce the Nature Conservancy of South Carolina's Executive Director, Dale Threet Taylor, and I'm going to let her close it out for us. Dale?
Thank you, David. Wow, this was great. What a great conversation today. Y'all go ahead and do the poll. I just got to thank some folks, and we didn't pick our speakers today just because all of their names started with J, you know, Jim, Josh, and Josh, but thank y'all so much. This was great. I hope everybody feels encouraged as I do. You know, after you listen to these comments and speakers and you want to ask yourself, where's South Carolina going when it comes to the intersection between forestry and carbon? And they also put some ideas in our mind about what else can we do. So this was a great conversation. But I did miss, if I didn't thank, first of all, the Forestry Association of South Carolina. Mike, please make sure you tell Cam I said hello. Don't you forget that. I'm a pop quiz you on that. Tell Cam I said hello. And thank you to our sponsor, Bridgestone, for making this series possible. Jim, we appreciate it. We're looking forward to working on an array of projects together down here in South Carolina, not just Tennessee. And we're so glad you're starting here in South Carolina and kick that off. Thank you so much. Hey, everybody, we've got more for you. We're going to come back next month, May 25th. And we're going to host our third and final event in this series. And we're going to co-host it with Sustain SC. And I'm thrilled about that. Y'all have got to make sure you join us. Sustain SC is dear to my heart, and I think you're going to love it. It's going to help us with a competitive edge about sustainability here in South Carolina. You know, how corporate sustainability opportunities can connect with our business recruitment, because that's important in South Carolina for our economic development. So May 25th, mark your calendars. I'm checking all of your calendars right now, so make sure you do that. But before you leave, you're going to see this slide with our contact information on it about the Nature Conservancy here in South Carolina. Our staff welcome your feedback. We look forward to hearing from you. We're not some, disjunct organization. We really love talking and working with everybody. And so if you can get your questions answered, you can reach out to us if we can assist you. Even if we don't have all the answers, we would love to talk with you about it. We're gathering that information from the poll, but I just want to make sure you look at the contact information, jot it down. Thanks again, everyone, for participating, and we hope to see you again. Have a great afternoon. Thank you to the team also for a great webinar. If I haven't met you in person, those of you on the panel, I would love to meet you in person. Take care. Thank you so much.